Three, two. Good morning and welcome to a brand new episode of Mindful Mornings with Mr. West. I'm so glad that you're here as we get ready to wrap up the end of the school year. It's been a very interesting school year. And today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that have been going on in our community in West Philadelphia and around the country, dealing with a lot of the protesting and figuring out how we can sort of balance our mental health and figure out that issue. And to do that, I brought in one of my professors from Penn, Dr. Warren. She taught multicultural counseling. And one of the things in counseling is we always like to ask for help when we don't know a lot of things or we need more resources or more information. So I reached out and I thought, who is the best person to bring in? And of course, my professor for multicultural counseling. And graciously, Dr. Warren agreed to be here. So thank you for coming in today and spending the time talking to our students, our families, and whoever else listens to this.
You're so welcome, Adam. Thanks for asking me and having me.
Yeah, so we're just going to go ahead and dive right in. And some of the things we're going to be talking about can be things that could possibly be triggering and that sort of stuff. So be aware of that. That can be things that cause a lot of reactions and everything. If you are not in a good space for that right now, I would recommend that you maybe watch this video in a little bit later when you're in a little better mind frame. And everything. But with that, we're going to dive right in. So Dr. Warren, one of the things I sort of want to know is how can we balance some of our frustrations between what's going on with police brutality and possibly be worried about the protests that are maybe happening in a community where we live? Mm-hmm. How can we sort of have both of those or whatever?
Well, Adam, I think that's a great question because I think as Black people who are living in the city where protests are happening, but also knowing the reason for the protests, we can have mixed feelings, right? And so I think it's okay for us to have those mixed feelings. We don't have to fully agree with the way some of the riots and the looting is happening because as we see, it's destroying our neighborhoods. And for those of us who are living in neighborhoods where our stores are destroyed, our grocery stores, the stores we go to get items that we need for our home, are no longer there. And so now, we're left with thinking, how are we going to get these things that we need? How are we going to continue to live? And especially when some of these looters and rioters are coming into our communities, tearing our communities down, but then going back to theirs where they still have these items in their areas can be very frustrating. And I think that we need to be okay with feeling, understanding that those are real feelings and we can be angry about that, but still recognizing the need for protests and recognizing that police brutality does exist, that it's typically against Black and brown people. And so we can be angry at that and be for the protesting, but also, feel a sense of, the why us community. Why did you have to come in and tear our community down and burn our stores down? So I think we need to sit with that and be comfortable with having both of those feelings.
That makes a lot of sense. Dr. Warren, if we're worried about protesting in the streets, maybe we're worried about COVID or we're worried about safety or we have young kids, but we still want to be supportive of the protests, what are some things that we can do to be supportive?
So, I'm glad you asked that because a lot of times when I'm teaching this course on social cultural issues and talking with people, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, we have to go out and get a sign and rally and walk the streets and raise our fist. But there's so many other things to do. I, for one, am not an individual who does that. I don't like crowds. It causes, difficult feelings for me. I have small children and, children I want to come back home to. So I get that people feel like if they're not part of that type of action, that they're not doing enough. But there are so many other areas. One definitely is that we can share our feelings with our white individuals and white allies and people who ask. If we don't share how we're feeling, they're not going to know. We can also have conversations with our family members and our community members. So while we're not out necessarily protesting in the larger crowd, there are smaller communities and smaller social groups that we can actually make change in. And as I used to teach you guys in class, this work is like a mobile, right? Where there's different parts to it. If one piece moves, the whole mobile moves. And so it's just maybe talking to one person, talking to one group of people, talking to the teachers in your school, talking to students in the community, and educating and teaching can be enough. What I'm typically doing right now is speaking out a lot on my Facebook forum. I have students, you know, as you did, I have multiple people who are reaching out to me saying, can we do Zoom calls? What type of avenue can I do within my community to help? And so that's the way that I'm giving back. And so we just need, once again, is to recognize what can you do? What do you feel comfortable doing? What fits into your lifestyle, and give back in that way. You don't have to be out in the streets and risk, you know, your safety if you don't feel comfortable.
Thanks for that perspective. That's one that feels like it can be lost sometimes in all this, and we can maybe feel guilty for not being out there.
Yeah, because I think that the idea is that I'm not doing enough if I'm not out there with the sign and protesting. But that's absolutely not true. I have never protested. It just is not, like I said, who I am. But I feel like I've touched a number of people in my 13 years. I'm in contact with them to this day. So I know there's other ways to make change.
What about this, Dr. Warren? Our mental health is already something that we were already worried about a lot of times before all this started, and then the COVID pandemic and everything. How can we sort of protect our own mental health or our family's mental health during all this tension and anxiety and everything else that's going on?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. And me, even as a clinician, you know, you and I have talked about it's tough for me, you know, and you know, I have training and I'm supposedly, you know, bred for this, but it is definitely a lot. And I think in speaking to families, I think what parents and guardians need to recognize is that you're the first source of support for your children, right? And those that's in your care. And so I say you first must make sure that your mental health is in a place that you can be that resource and that support. And if that means you have to go into a room by yourself, cry, call a friend, talk to someone else, call a therapist, a counselor, another adult to really process this, watch these, you know, these media clips in private until you can make sense of it. Recognizing your own anxiety, your own depression, and how that's playing out. So we're not putting that on the children. And then the other piece of this is, you know, remembering that we do have some other positives to what's going on now. And I know it's hard. The news media typically tends to highlight all the negativity and really highlighting this level of racism. And as we know, racism to this level has been here way before George Floyd was killed. Is just being highlighted. And so we were making it, we were living, we were recognizing some positive things in our life, moving on with life way before George Floyd was killed and murdered. And I think it's okay for us to recognize that we can continue to do that and not feel guilty. You know, like I'm still trying to play with my kids and go out and play badminton and go out and take walks and try to enjoy the positive things that are going well for me and not focus on negative. And if you guys recognize, the more you focus on negative and misery and what's not right and oh my gosh, and this is never going to change, the more that our mental health gets into a negative mindset, and it's hard for us to be there for our family members. So I just say really try to balance that that negativity with the positive.
Yeah, and to go out and look for that, which is hard to find sometimes.
Yeah.
Do you have sort of dovetailing off that? Do you have any advice or tips for parents for talking about these issues with their kids?
Yeah, it's once again, as a Black parent, and I actually have two Black male sons, males and sons, right, who are coming through. And so it has been very difficult. The first thing I say, and this might be hard, and some of you may not agree with me, and that's totally okay. I just want you to think about it, is thinking about how, I'm a 47-year-old Black female, and how race played out for me in my life, and what feelings I got because of racism that I might have endured, the negative emotions and trauma that come from that. I'm very careful not to place that onto my children because they're in a different time period. I have a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they're both have a diverse group of friends. And if I was someone who was always talking about all whites this, all whites that, all whites are horrible, that's going to send a different message to them than I want. I want them to start to think about racial diversity in a different way than maybe I had to live. And I wish my parents had done that with me, but they put, you know, their issues with race onto me coming up, and then it was up to me to kind of change that generational trend. And so I say, first and foremost, think about what you're feeling about racial issues, and if that's really something that has to be put on your children. Secondly, I say be very open and honest with them. When they ask you questions, you answer their questions. This is not anything different than any other topic that we would talk about with our kids. We have to talk about it in a developmentally appropriate way. So my 12-year-old is not really asking a lot of identity questions. He's asking more questions about safety. Is it safe to go here? Is it safe to go there? Can I leave the home? Whereas my 15-year-old is really asking more deep questions about what it is to be a Black male, how to portray his identity, that he doesn't want to be looked at as a victim. So our conversations are different. And so I just, want you to be open and honest, and not, as I said, just kind of push your view, but try to hear what your children are asking you. Try to hear what they're saying. And that's the next thing, is to listen, to leave a place for your children to want to come back. This is a difficult conversation. It makes us uncomfortable. And that's why I say, first and foremost, tap into what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. So when your children are responding to you and giving answers and asking questions, you can kind of like be prepared. Like, certain questions are going to trigger things in you. Certain responses are going to trigger responses in you. And you don't want to shut this conversation down, because as we know nowadays, there's media, there's social media, there's the internet, there's YouTube. So our children don't have to come to us. If they get shut down with us, they'll go to another site and get something somewhere else that we may not want them to get. So those are, kind of the three main tips I would say for parents. That's for parents of color. When we're thinking about white parents, I think it's definitely important for you guys to make sure that you're educating your children about race. Please don't send this message of being colorblind and that you don't see color. Teach your children to see color, but teach your children to see color in a way that exemplifies and enhances one's diversity. And have them think about, because this person's skin color is different from mine, that means that they had a different experience in America, right? Also model for your children what you want them to do. If you don't want them to be racist and have racist beliefs and thoughts, and you don't want them to do things that might be perceived as racist, then you don't do that. You model for them. You show them this is how we interact with other people. That's, I think that's a lot. Sorry to overwhelm you, but I think it's definitely, we have to be mindful. There's different top conversations in different types of households.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the idea of listening in all of this is probably something that takes a lot of work too, right? Because it brings up a lot of emotions, and just being able to actually listen to somebody when we're so frustrated or worked up can be one of the most challenging pieces, maybe, to have this conversation.
Yes, and especially when our own trauma is being triggered, right? And our own experiences, my husband is actually struggling with this. He's not a clinician, he's a techie person, and as a Black male, when my oldest is like questioning things or not quite sure, he's just like, what do you mean you don't get it? This is what it is, and he doesn't listen anymore, right? He's trying to put his experience onto my son. And then that shuts my son down. And so that's what I'm saying. It's not the best way to try to educate our children.
Yeah. And this is going to be, I think, my last question.
Okay.
You sort of hit on this, but, as an educator, someone who is a school counselor working in a school, how can a diverse group of school leaders support our families and our communities who live in areas where a lot of the protesting is happening?
So as you said, exploring our feelings and our thoughts, that is always the toughest. And sometimes in an educational setting, teachers feel like, I'm just here to teach. I'm not a counselor, right? I don't have to be a therapist and all that kind of stuff. But if you want to be a better human, and a human who is being connected with all types of people, you really need to look at your biases and your stereotypes. And sometimes confronting them is the hardest and longest process, because you have those individuals who say, oh, I don't see color, I don't have any biases, I don't have any stereotypes, I love all people. But when you really get down to it and sit and say, when I see this Black man or this Black boy, this is what I think, right? And then trace that back to, where did that come from? Where did it start that you started to have that belief or that thought about Black males? And then you need to question that information that you were given. And most times individuals, when they question it, it's like because of one person, one statement, one incident, some negative media coverage, right? And then that's where the education starts to come into play. Really start to educate yourself about what happened in America for Black people. And I know people try to say, you know, oh, slavery was 400 years ago, it's over, get over it, you know, but when you think about the historical context of what slavery did to the Black family and really trace it all the way down, it's intergenerational trauma, intergenerational consequences and outcomes that still impact us today. The same way white history impacts, you know, the white wealth. And so many people don't really think about that. They're not educated about all of that. And so the more education you get, the more ahas you'll get, the more you'll be like, oh, that's why that. That's why, you know, people from a lower socioeconomic status, you know, remains in poverty. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because they don't want to work. It's not because they don't care about the education of their children. It's because of these systemic isms and systemic racism and systemic social classism that keeps people down. And then that education will help you to start having, you know, stop having so many biases and stereotypes. Will biases and stereotypes ever go away? Probably not. I still struggle with that. I still catch myself. But what it is I'm catching myself. They're no longer just automatic that I act on. I recognize it, I stop it, and I say, now, why did that come up for you? What about this situation is causing you to think this way? But it keeps me from acting against a group of people in a way that's detrimental. And that's what individuals who are from the dominant culture really need to think about when you're working with individuals from lower from lower SES who are children of color. What do you really think about this group? What negative thoughts and beliefs are you having about this group that's causing you to have these automatic actions that would be maltreatment for them? And that's hard, Adam, as you know, like we talked about this in class. It's really hard to be able to step back and say, wow, there's white privilege. And I may have benefited from that. Most, you know, white people I know will say, oh, well, you know, I don't want to be guilty and I didn't do anything. I didn't own slaves. You're right. But you still prosper from white privilege and you still prosper and you're still, if you're not going to be part of the solution, you continue to be part of the problem.
Yeah, I know it was really sort of became uncomfortable when I started digging into sort of the area where I grew up in and looking at all the exploitations of marginalized communities for the advancement and the prosperity of white people in my area in Northwest Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that made me really uncomfortable. And these sort of conversations, everything are never fun to really do introspectively or
Right.
everything, and can make us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Dr. Warren, I just want to thank you so much for coming on today. I know this is not a fun subject to talk about, and it can bring up a lot of different emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But I thank you for helping us provide some of these services for the community and for our students and families. And I hope that you have a great rest of your school year and enjoy your summer. And I hope that hopefully next year, the fall of 2020, a lot of these systemic issues are sort of lessened and we've sort of figured out what the next step is as a country. That's what my hope is for the summer. But
yeah, I'm going to be with you on that, Adam. I'm going to hope and pray for that too. And I really appreciate you once again, as I said before, reaching out to me and asking me to come on. Anything I can do to try to help our communities, I'm definitely always open to do that. So thank you so much.
No problem. It was a pleasure talking to you, and have a great summer.
You too.
All right. Everyone, have a great summer if I don't see you again, and I hope that you stay safe and that you manage all this mental health and all these issues we're talking about in our various videos. All these are going to be up all summer. If you do need somewhere to turn, whether it's a guided meditation or a relaxing music video, these are up on the channel and you can access them anytime. Have a great summer, and we'll see you next fall.